and his loss in weeds of sorrow.
Good morning. I had some audio problems there. Rise and Freedom. I'm Austin Peterson. You're watching and listening to the Wake Up America show, and that's on the For Liberty Network. How we doing, guys? Nice to see everybody. At least that's working. Glad and thankful to have you here. You know, for the last 2 weeks, the world has been looking at America and seeing something that the ruling class can barely stand to admit. They see the stadiums full. They see the roads actually working here. They see the giant stores, the Buc-ee's, the Costco's, the huge portion size that Americans are eating, the wide streets, big houses, ordinary people here who are friendly. Kansas City, Missouri, as we all know, one of the nicest cities in the country. Of course. They see American abundance, these foreigners. They see a country that has scale, room to grow, energy, life. And the funniest part is the foreigners can see this a lot more clearly than the people who want to try and govern this country. Now, I read this story over the weekend. It was so good. These Dutch fans, they crossed an ocean to come to Kansas City for the World Cup. They're walking around like they've landed on another planet. Everything is 3 times the size that it is. People are so rich here. The exit signs are magnificent. The nachos are too big to finish. The houses have space in them. The land is affordable compared to Europe. People are nice. This is what America looks like when you're not trained by American elites to hate it, or when you travel here from living in a country where they really hate their own people. And while foreign fans were falling in love with our country, Politico published this other story about how the Democrats are grappling uncomfortably with the World Cup actually going well for America. I'm not kidding. They're grappling uncomfortably with America. They're not cheering. They're not celebrating. They're not saying, great job, America, because a successful World Cup on American soil is a problem if your entire political identity depends on the country failing when the wrong man is president. One Democratic strategist even admitted this. There had been liberal wish casting that maybe the tournament would be a disaster just to stick it to Trump. So in other words, the left was hoping that the biggest sporting event on earth would collapse in our own country, embarrass our own people, humiliate our own cities, and damage our own reputation, because then they could score a point against Donald Trump. This is the reason why you see them sticking their hands in and ripping up the lining in the reflecting pool, right? This is a sickness that the left has.
That's the first time I've ever seen them get up. And actually, not all of them did get up.
Yeah, the Democrats couldn't even cheer for the men's soccer team. So, but this is bigger than soccer. This is bigger than the World Cup, right? This is the same party that has to issue a disclaimer or a land acknowledgement before they say something good about an American president brokering a peace deal. Like the same party that can praise the process, praise the Qataris, praise the Egyptians. They can praise the local communities, praise everybody in the room except the country and the president who delivered the results. They can stand in front of a flag. They can use the word democracy 600 times a day. But when America actually wins, they look like they just ate a bug. I think I just ate a bug. There's the audio level. So that's why today's show starts with the question Democrats don't want to answer. Do they love America, or do they only love America when they control it, right? Because there is a difference. Patriotism means you can cheer when your country succeeds, even if your opponent gets some credit. Partisan bitterness means you'd rather see your country embarrassed than see your enemy proven right. Do you truly think that if Obama were president, that the Republicans would not have stood up to clap for the USA World Soccer team? That is how the left feels about this country. And so this same question runs through the entire show today, because after that, we're going to go to the Nixon Library, where JD Vance last week said out loud what a lot of the younger right now believes in this country, that the deep state took down Richard Nixon. And I know that Roger Stone, if he's listening this morning, he's going to love this segment, the guy with the big tattoo of Richard Nixon across his back. But whether you agree with that or not, whether or not Richard Nixon is a hero in your mind, the reason that JD Vance praising Richard Nixon gets applause is simple. Young people do not trust the institutions anymore. They do not trust the press. They do not trust the FBI. They do not trust the intelligence agencies. They do not trust the lawyers who are telling us they're saving democracy while they try to remove the people voters elected. And for that, we thank you. Then at 8 a.m. Central, God bless it, this is probably the best interview that I have ever conducted, and you are going to be exposed to it this morning at 8 a.m. Central. We're going to talk to Walter Block. This is a man who has spent his life defending liberty, defending property rights, defending free speech, and defending the undefendable, only to get purged by the people who decided the one thing that they could not tolerate was a libertarian who supported Israel after October 7th's terrorist attacks by Hamas. So it's the same story in another form. Love the wrong country, defend the wrong people, say the wrong thing, refuse the party line, and suddenly those people who preach liberty start acting like commissars. So that's the thread today. Democrats who cannot cheer for America, a right-wing Nixon revival that's built on the total distrust of the institutions that claim to protect America, and Walter Block joins me for an hour-long interview, a special at 8 a.m. Central, on what happens when the liberty movement starts purging heretics instead of arguing with them. So the world can still see something great in this country. It's just a shame that our Democrat leadership can't.
So tonight I'm inviting every legislator to join with my administration in reaffirming a fundamental principle. If you agree with this statement, then stand up and show your support. The first duty of the American government is to protect American citizens, not illegal aliens.
Look at him sitting down. Look at that. Shows you where their loyalties lie. So the world could still see something great in America, but the left cannot see anything great in America. I think the problem is not America. I think the problem is the people who spent their lives trying to rule a country that they don't even like. For 2 weeks, these stadiums have been full. The logistics have held. The World Cup has been going off without a hitch. No terror attacks, thank goodness. Foreign fans have been pouring into cities that they've never heard of. They are amazed at the size of the stadiums we have in this country. And they've been going home telling everyone that America is vast and friendly and richer than they had imagined. And meanwhile, the people who came here from France go back to their apartments. I don't know if you've seen some of these videos, but I watched a video yesterday of the Associated Press. Apparently, many of these rooftops in Paris, where they have these apartments that are on like the 7th floor with no elevators, they have to walk up to these. A lot of these rooftop apartments have zinc that is covering the top of their apartment buildings, which is a perfect thing to keep heat contained inside, and they have no air conditioning inside. So the French are cooking now that they've gone back, and they're making all these TikToks and Instagram reels about how much they miss American air conditioning, because we have air conditioning inside our stadiums, giant stadiums. that are air conditioning. Now, the World Cup here has been a success by almost every measure. But for one political party, that turned out to be a problem because last Thursday, Politico ran this story about Democrats grappling uncomfortably with the tournament going well. Now, the word in their own headline from Politico was grappling. That's like as if a successful event in their own country was a fight they might lose. A Democratic strategist by the name of Rob Flaherty, he's a soccer fan who actually went to the USA match against Australia. He said it pretty plainly. He said there had been, in his words, a little bit of liberal wish casting that this would be a disaster. That this would be a disaster, to sort of stick it to Trump. And it hasn't been. So that's a paid strategist for the party conceding on the record that people on his own side had been hoping that the biggest sporting event on the planet would collapse on American soil, because a collapse, of course, if that happened, could be hung around the president's neck, just like all this fiasco with the what do you call it? The reflecting pool, right? So but the stadiums have filled anyway. The fans fell for the country anyway. And now the same politicians who spent months attacking the event are turning up at the games, while are turning up at the games for the cameras, of course, while they're steering the credit carefully around the administration and trying to name anybody else for doing a great job at helping the World Cup come off. So a country hosted the World, we pulled it off, and one country they can't even figure out whether or not they're allowed to be proud about this. So Politico published this report by Adam Wren on Democrats that are grappling uncomfortably with the World Cup's success. The tournament's first 2 weeks boosted our country's global reputation. We've had sold-out stadiums, very few logistical complications, and it's forced Democrats who had criticized Trump's preparations to reconsider. Rob Flaherty goes to this event, explains to Politico why the Democrats had been hoping that this was a disaster. So now the opposition, they weren't all cynical, because the tournament, before the tournament, the Democrats confronted FIFA and the administration over the high prices and the government's posture towards foreign visitors. So that was a real political headache that came out. And as the tournament approached, local officials in host areas flipped from critics to cheerleaders, though, including New York City Mayor Zoran Mamdani and New Jersey Governor Mikey Sherrill. The complaints stopped the moments the cameras and the crowd showed up, because things were going so well that the more, savvy political figures on the left realized that they needed to embrace it and not walk away. Representative Brendan Boyle, who is a Philadelphia Democrat, went further than most. He actually called the tournament a remarkable success and vowed to do everything he could to bring the World Cup back as soon as possible. So not all Democrats are complete idiots. They would, at least from a political perspective, even if they're wrong on policy. So there are a few out there who understand that this was good for them. Now, what was funny though was that the ones who did make the right decisions, like this Brendan Boyle, they got so harassed. They were so harassed by the left that Boyle and a few other Democrats started to hedge. So when he was confronted by the leftist press, Boyle said that the moment was devoid of politics, and it would be best to keep politics out of it. So the call for no politics, of course, only arrived once the politics would have favored the administration running the country. So as soon as this Democratic representative started praising the World Cup, the left realized that, oh, no. By praising the World Cup, you're praising this administration. And so therefore we have to shut it down. So now, okay, I see you guys are sending me messages. The computer audio. Let's see if this is working. Hold on.
So tonight I'm inviting every legislator to join with my administration in reaffirming a fundamental principle.
You hearing that?
If you agree with this statement, then stand up and show your support. First duty.
You're getting the computer audio now, guys. Good morning. Red Pill Prof, NGM 77, Rare Camellia, Murtek, T Marsh. Nice to see you guys all here with us today. Welcome to Wake Up America show. Can you hear me now? Oh, gosh. So the foreign visitors who came to visit, some of these Dutch fans who filled the Kansas City suburbs, they came away calling our country vast and bountiful. They say people are so rich here. They talked about meeting ordinary Americans, and the charm offensive worked on everybody except the home team opposition. Politico's own reporting had to frame the success as a lift to America's standing in the world because it's true. And that Democratic Representative Boyle, he noted the value of foreign fan bases, learning more about the United States by interacting with its people. Many of the TikToks and Reels that have been coming out have been these foreigners. And some of it is probably that they just want to go viral. They want to go viral by complimenting us as Americans. And we do like compliments, don't we? We love compliments as America. I'll admit it. You say something nice about America, I immediately like and reshare. But at least the ones who were just trying to go viral, a lot of them were saying overwhelmingly that they had all been lied to by the media in their countries about what the United States was like, about what they thought the United States was going to be like, what they thought Americans were going to be like. And it turned out to all be lies. They were not. They have been drinking the Kool-Aid in their countries, just like a lot of progressives are. And I think some of this, maybe not all of it, but I do think some of this is because of the fact that we do have sort of a two-tiered society for what kind of media that people consume. So if you consume a diet of mainstream media, then you're going to have a certain viewpoint that's going to be impacted. If you consume more of the alternative media, it's a little bit more obvious. Have you noticed this divide in people that you speak to? So, for example, whenever we have somebody who comes in from out of town to stay at our house, they like to watch ABC News, CBS News. So my algorithm I don't have cable news. You can only kind of watch cable news through YouTube on my channels because I do alternative media only pretty much. I watch some clips and snippets, but my algorithm gets messed up from watching the lamestream media clips. So for like 2 or 3 days, I'll be like, okay, well, what does the lamestream media say? What is ABC News saying? What is CBS News saying? Those mainstream news networks. And I'm like, wow, these people are just living in a completely different world. It's so obvious when you see it, the stark difference in the type of media that people consume and their mindsets. So I wonder if you've seen this as well, if you know anyone that watches the lamestream media and what your thoughts are. Send us a text at 573-319-1586. That's 573-319-1586. That's the text line. You can drop a comment, click the like button if you guys haven't already, and follow. If today is the first time you've ever watched the Wake Up America show, click the follow button over here on Rumble. We'd love to have you be a regular guest. Come back and join us every Monday through Friday from 7 to 9 a.m. Central Time. That's the Wake Up America show schedule, and we're sticking to it. We've got a great show for you today. The second half of the show, starting at 8 a.m., is an hour-long interview that I have with Professor Walter Block, the Mozart of libertarianism. We're going to talk to him about why he was ejected from the Mises Institute. We'll talk to him about Javier Milei, Hans Hermann Hoppe, the non-aggression principle, his endorsement and then unendorsement of me for president of the United States back in 2016. It's going to be a very compelling hour-long interview, so make sure that you stick around for that about 30 minutes from now. We do have bonus content available for you today in the Wake Up America show. If you'd like to see our mini documentary, all we have to do is raise $100 either in Rumble Rants, in gifted subs, or in purchases made at forlibertyshop.com. At forlibertyshop.com, the 250th anniversary collection has been going crazy for us this last year. So if you guys haven't visited the Grift Shop in a while, today's a great day to do it. Head on over to forlibertyshop.com. That's the number 4libertyshop.com so that you can be as cool as Joni Rankin. I'm drinking Jeffersonian Java this morning, and there's a reason why this is the number one selling product at forlibertyshop.com. Well, it was number one until the 250th G.I. Joe shirt came out, or G.I. Joe themed shirt came out. But I'm sure that Jeffersonian Java is going to climb back up from number two. But there's a reason why it's number one. And I think not only is the coffee itself delicious, not only does it come in a beautiful box that makes a great gift to somebody who loves freedom in your life or just likes Thomas Jefferson in general, but it's because the light roast means more caffeine. So I'm drinking it right now, and I got a hella buzzed off of it. So head on over to 4libertyshop.com. That's the number 4libertyshop.com, so that you can be as cool as Joni Rankin, Quest Fanning, Relaxium McGroin, Thormock, and Mary Kramer, and Red Pill Prof. So many others as well. Thanks so much for supporting us, guys. Speaking of the mainstream media, looks like I'm going to be on Fox News again. Yeah. So I got the call. That's what they say when you say you got the call. So I got the call. I will be back on Fox News after the 4th of July holidays. So I guess they're just booking out ahead a schedule like more than normal. So on July the 7th, again at the Devil's Butt Crack of Dawn, I will be on Fox and Friends first. So keep an eye out for that, guys. Yeah, I don't know what happened, because I think it was like a year or a year and a half ago that they started having me on the show, and I think they had me on 2, maybe 3 times back then, and then it just kind of fell off a cliff, and then all of a sudden it just revived, and now I'm back, baby. I'm back on Fox News, so keep an eye out for that. Don't know what the topics are just yet, but your boy's starting to make some moves, so keep an eye on us, and so of course, thank you for all your support, because without like this community and all of the financial support that you guys have given us, there's no way we could have lasted as long as we have. Podcasts like this are not supposed to last 3 years. We're not supposed to have 6 live shows and build a whole entire libertarian network on this one. They're never going to see us coming. You're going to be like, Austin, where did all this come from? Check that out over there. You can see the For Liberty Network sign. Hold on, let me see if I can pull it up here. We designed this before we even had the news ready that Brad Beckman was going to have his own show on the For Liberty Network. Check this out. These are 5 live shows, but we actually have an extra show. We're taking this with us to Las Vegas, the Freedom Fest. See, there's me. We got Brian Piotr, Daniela Pensack, Mylene Salabaria, and the lovely Steffi for the Freedom Arcade. So we actually have 6 live shows. Count them, 6 live. This is what you guys have built. This is what you guys have built. I can take credit for some of this, but if Mary Kramer wasn't doing her 1776, I mean, freaking Amy J. Easley is donating $50 a month. This is what your money is going towards, guys. And this isn't even all of it. We've got this. We've got the Grift Shop. We've got Wake Up Jefferson City coming next month. So remember, when you go to forlibertyshop.com, guys, you're helping to support the growth and the careers and building up of this entire institution. So it's not just AP. It's a whole community that we've built. So can I just take a moment and say thank you, guys? Thank you. Look at that. Look at this. Awesome. Good job. Oh, and thank you to Stephanie for making that nice graphic and putting that all together. We're going to be going to Freedom Fest here in just a few weeks. All right, guys. So we're going to take a quick little break. When we get back, Richard NixonMaxxing. This is the rejection of boomer politics in the war on the deep state. When we get back, we're going to talk about why we're all Richard Nixonians now. He said we're all Keynesians now, but now we're all Nixonians. We'll talk about that, and then still we've got the Walter Block interview at 8 o'clock. It's going to be a great show. Don't go away. Go to forlibertyshop.com. This is the Wake Up America show on the For Liberty Network. George Washington spent 8 years making sure nobody knew where he was. Troop movements, secret dispatches. The man was a ghost. So when a barista leaned out a window and asked for his exact location in exchange for points they called stars, he looked at his flag and said, "I've already got my stars. 13 of them. Keep your dignity and your location intact. Grab a box of Washington's Revolutionary Roast at forlibertyshop.com.
Hark! I've discovered a brew so bold, 'Twill ignite the spirit of liberty. This is not merely coffee, 'tis the very essence of American boldness. Give me coffee, or give me death. Go to For Liberty Shop to procure yours now.
'Tis the year of our Lord, 1801. President Trump Jefferson casts his gaze o'er the sovereign Potomac and beholds a most wretched spectacle upon the waters. From the cursed shores of Tripoli and the welfare coffers of distant Minnesota comes the brazen Captain Ilhan Omar, commanding her fleet of Barbary pirates. She demands her ransom, billions in reparations. Yet one instrument of fortitude suffices, a steaming chalice of Jeffersonian Java, bold and unapologetic from For Liberty shop. No more tribute to rogues, he thunders, and dispatches the Navy and Marines to smash Omar's fleet asunder. Trump Jefferson stands triumphant as Omar's plunder meets the end it deserved back in Minnesota. Jeffersonian Java, the coffee that gives true Americans the courage to refuse tribute and rebuke fraud. Procure yours at forlibertyshop.com and make America caffeinated again.
Nixon is from nothing, self-made man, the Abe Lincoln of California, who was vice president of the United States 6 years after getting out of the Navy. Kennedy, I see a silver spoon. Nixon, I see myself.
Out in the six, I'm a national treasure. That bad me gon' bad me forever. R.B. Kobe, but y'all brokey. That's probably why y'all be shacking together. Capo and leader got habits together like couples vacation. They packing together like rushing to finish. They'll slap it together. The charges like COVID, they'll catch it together.
Nixon.
Good morning, Rise and Freedom. I'm Austin Peterson. You're watching and listening to the Wake Up America show on the For Liberty Network. Last Thursday afternoon in Yorba Linda, California, JD Vance walked through the Richard Nixon Library past the grave marker where the epitaph reads, "The greatest honor history can bestow is the title of peacemaker." Vance has just flown home from Switzerland, and he was in the midst of a real negotiation. And now he settles into a chair in front of a friendly crowd and says without flinching that the deep state took Richard Nixon down. Now the room went crazy, and he kept going. He said if Watergate happened tomorrow, he tells them, it would be a 12-hour news story, and the idea that it could bring down a presidency is crazy.
In history. I think that
That's so annoying, guys. Having a little trouble with the audio. Sorry.
Doing a bit of a renaissance, but I think deservedly so. As I joked with Robert backstage, if Watergate happened tomorrow, it would be like a 12-hour news story. Like the idea that it would have taken down a presidency is crazy. And
he basically said what I said anyway. Sorry about the audio challenges, guys. So he says the idea that would bring down a presidency is crazy, right? The same institutions that broke Nixon, he argues, later came for Donald Trump. And then he turns the knife on himself on purpose. He runs through the list, a young senator who became vice president, who wrote best-selling books, and who couldn't buy a kind word from the media. That sounds a lot like JD Vance. Now, 50 years ago, defending Richard Nixon in public ended careers. Now on Thursday, it was the loudest applause in the building. Nixon, the man who a whole generation was taught to treat as the villain of every civics class. I remember every history class that I had normally glossed over the Nixonian period. It would be, the war in Vietnam was terrible, but it was all the Republicans' fault somehow, right? But now Nixon has become sort of a folk hero to a younger right that no longer trusts a single person who brought him down. And they have a point. The man who actually fed Nixon to the Washington Post was not a senator. He wasn't even a voter. He was the number 2 official at the FBI. He was passed over for the top job and was basically settling a score in a parking garage after midnight. But what nobody in that library, the Nixon Library, wanted to admit is it's actually simpler and a lot worse. Richard Nixon did help build that same machine that ate him alive. On June 25th, 2026, at the Presidential Library in Yorba Linda, JD Vance tells the audience the deep state takes down Richard Nixon, that Watergate would be a 12-hour news story, The same institutions that broke Nixon tried the same against Donald Trump in his first term. Now he's there. He's promoting his new book, Communion, widely considered to be a forthcoming presidential candidate. And this is part of his publicity tour. But he makes a lot of sense. Vance compared himself directly to Nixon, listing a young senator, a vice president, a writer of best-selling books, hated by the media. And it does sound a lot like JD Vance. And he says Nixon's legacy is enjoying a renaissance and that he always liked him. Now, Deep Throat, who was the anonymous source who guided the Washington Post's Watergate reporting, was a man by the name of W. Mark Felt, who was the associate director of the FBI and the Bureau's second highest official during the scandal. This man hid his identity for 33 years and confirmed it in a 2005 Vanity Fair article at age 91. Those are the facts. Felt did have a personal motive. After J. Edgar Hoover died in May of 1972, Felt expected to run the FBI, but Nixon passed him over and instead installed loyalist L. Patrick Gray. Felt then began secretly feeding leads to reporter Bob Woodward in a Roslyn, Virginia parking garage. The man who took down a president for abusing power was himself convicted of abusing power. In 1980, Felt was found guilty of conspiring to violate citizens' constitutional rights by authorizing illegal FBI break-ins at homes tied to the Weather Underground. President Reagan pardoned him in March of 1981. The Watergate special prosecutor, Archibald Cox, was a Kennedy man. He had served as Solicitor General under Attorney General Robert Kennedy and had advised Ted Kennedy against Nixon's Supreme Court nominees. Cox staffed his office with more than 15 former Kennedy and former LBJ Justice Department lawyers, eventually past 70 attorneys. Now, Vance's affection for Nixon isn't new or just casual because Nixon told Henry Kissinger in 1972 that professors are the enemy. Now, write that on the blackboard 100 times and never forget it. Vance quoted that line verbatim in a November 2021 National Conservatism Conference speech that he titled, "The Universities Are the Enemy." Now, the crimes were real. On June 17th, 1972, 5 men tied to Nixon's re-election committee were caught breaking into Democratic National Committee headquarters with bugging equipment and White House phone numbers. Nixon worked to obstruct the FBI probe and then resigned on August 9th, 1974, facing near certain impeachment. The left's rebuttal was this. On MSNBC's Morning Joe Scarborough says that Vance's claim are ahistoric and stupid. He argued that Nixon's own use of the FBI and CIA was the deep state operating at Nixon's direction, not against him. But the Nixonian renaissance on the right is real, but it hasn't reached the general public yet. It's still something more of the elite political operator class. Vivek Ramaswamy even called Nixon the most underappreciated president at the same library in 2023. But a Gallup poll from December of 2024 found 54% of Americans rated Nixon below average or poor, against just 12% who said he was above average or outstanding. So he gets the worst score of the 10 presidents that were tested. And I will say this, that the Nixon revival is not really about nostalgia for the 70s. What this really is a revolt against the boomer morality play that came out of the 1970s. For half a century, Richard Nixon was not treated as a failed president who committed real abuses and paid the price. He was treated as the great American villain. So Nixon became the monster under the bed of liberal democracy, the name that every respectable person invoked when they wanted to warn that the right was getting too angry, too suspicious, too anti-elitist, too populist, too willing to fight. And of course, that story about Richard Nixon served a very important purpose. It fed into the myths of the boomer legacy that gave us these No King protests. It gave the boomer establishment their founding myth. Watergate became their civic religion. The press in this story are always lauded as heroes. The prosecutors in this case were the priests. The intelligence agencies involved were all well-meaning public servants. And Congress was the last line of defense against a corrupt president. Television became the national conscience, and Nixon was the dark warning from history. But the younger right does not believe that boomer mythology because it has watched these same institutions discredit themselves in real time. We have watched intelligence officials become cable news pundits. There is a former CIA agent who, a disgruntled intel man, who is on the payroll of Sputnik Radio right now. So he has gone from serving our country as an intelligence agent to now serving as an agent for a foreign intelligence operation that's being conducted here in the United States. Is it any wonder why the young people are so distrustful of these institutions? We've watched anonymous bureaucrats launder leak through friendly reporters throughout the entire Trump administrations. We've watched lawyers and prosecutors turn politics into a permanent courtroom against one man, Donald Trump, just like they did with Richard Nixon. They tried to run the same deep state playbook against Donald Trump that they ran successfully against Richard Nixon. But now, the young right, the NIXONMAXXING right, they're not falling for it. And of course, we've all watched the legacy press abandoning even the pretense of neutrality while still demanding the moral authority of Walter Cronkite. I'm sorry, but that has all been spent up. We've all watched the national security state, the media, and the legal professions in this country treat Donald Trump not merely as an opponent, but like he is an illegitimate presence inside the system. So when JD Vance stands at the Nixon Library and says that the deep state took Nixon down, the applause that people have, it's not just about Nixon. It is reflective of the collapse of trust that the young right and many young people in general have in the institutions. The old Watergate story required Americans to believe that the institutions that were surrounding Nixon were cleaner than Nixon was. That assumption is entirely dead. Maybe Nixon was paranoid, but paranoia looks different after the last decade. Maybe Nixon had enemies, but now everyone can see that presidents do have enemies inside their own government. How can that not be seen as anything other than, at least, if not an entire win for libertarianism, at least a step in the right direction? Maybe Nixon hated the press, but now millions of Americans hate the press too, and they have plenty of reason to do so. Let me ask you a question. Let me poll the audience and drop your comments below in the chat. If you're not able to drop your comments below in the chat, it's because you're not watching us on Rumble. When you should be watching us on Rumble, you should be at rumble.com/AP for Liberty. Is the reason that you're watching the Wake Up America show right now because you don't trust the press? I would venture a guess that the people who are watching this show live right now, that one of the main reasons why you watch this show is because you do not trust the legacy media. You could be like the millions of other Americans watching Good Morning America this morning on whatever channel it's on. You could be watching ABC News, NBC News. You could be watching some like flashy graphics, some, go to a local reporter in, Turkestan and, like little snippets of news here and there. You could be watching that, but instead you choose to watch the Wake Up America show. Now, I'm sure, some of you are like, maybe have a little crush on me. Just kidding. But I would venture a guess that if you polled everybody who's watching us live right now, that one of the main reasons why you're watching this show is because you feel like when you turn on the lamestream media that you're being lied to. That's why people turn to these alternative institutions, so that you can get at least if you don't agree with everything that I have to say, you probably know that I believe everything that I say, or that at least to some extent you think that I'm giving you the truth as I see it, even if I don't always get it right. St. Selma says, I truly dislike being lumped together with the liberal hippie goofball boomers. I have nothing in common with them other than my birthday. Well, we know that, Selma. We would never lump you in with them. But the point of this segment, the point of Nixon maxing, is to say, this is why Nixon has become useful again. Not because the young right wants to revive every Nixon policy. They definitely don't. Right? Not because they're passionate about the EPA. I don't think that young right-wingers, even as much as they say we need to seize control of the institutions and use them for our own purposes, probably many of them would not say that about the EPA. Probably many of them would not be in favor of wage and price controls. And I definitely think that most of the people who are Nixon maxing at this moment probably didn't agree with Richard Nixon opening China. And that is another interesting conversation, especially for us free trade libertarians to have. Nixon matters, and we are Nixon maxing because Nixon represents the thing that boomer politics spent 50 years trying to suppress. The knowledge that politics is conflict, that the institutions of our government are not neutral, that respectable people lie, that enemies exist, and that power does not disappear just because it wears a suit and quotes the Constitution. Now, Reagan told Americans that it was morning again, but Nixon reminds them that it also gets dark. And this is why Nixon's awkwardness now reads as authenticity. His enemies list seems less shocking in an age when every institution has enemy list of its own. Again, and frequently we are the ones named on those lists. Nixon's contempt for professors, bureaucrats, reporters, and establishment moralists feels less like madness and more like recognition of reality. Nixon's roughness is a rebuke to the fake civility of boomer politics. The politics that could bomb countries, lie to voters, hollow out the middle class, and then scold everyone about norms. Now, Watergate was real, the cover-up was real, the abuse of power was real. The tragedy is not that Nixon was a pure man who was destroyed by evil institutions. The tragedy is that the institutions were corrupt too, and the people who turned Nixon into the symbol of corruption used that symbolism to hide their own. So that is the real reason Nixon is back. He's not back because America has forgotten Watergate. He's back because America remembers what came after it. One of the more interesting parts of JD Vance's speech when he was talking about Nixon, he says, Nixon's coalition in 72 is actually durable and much more closely resembles the Trump coalition of 2024 than the Reagan coalition of 84. So what Reagan did in 84 is he ran up margins basically with white Americans, but the country is much less white today than it was in 1984. Nixon's coalition was unbelievably durable to the demographic change that we've seen in the United States of America. Ronald Reagan could not have won his landslide in 2024 if he had run for president. Richard Nixon maybe could have won his landslide in 2024. And I think that's a very important political lesson in that for all of us in the Republican Party. So what did Vance mean? So Vance was making a demographic and coalitional argument about what kind of Republican coalition can still win big in a more diverse America. And this is, I think, one of the key points. So in 1972, Richard Nixon's silent majority, or the new majority, he won a massive landslide, 49 states, 61% of the popular vote. Did you know this? I didn't know this until I was researching for this story. He assembled a broad cross-cutting coalition, and it drew heavily from working and middle-class voters, including many traditional Democrats, white, ethnics, Catholics, union households in the North and Midwest, and especially Southern whites who were abandoning the Democratic Party at the time. The core appeals of the Nixon strategy were law and order, opposition to the counterculture hippies, elites, skepticism of big government programs on issues like welfare and busing, economic concerns like inflation, and a more realist foreign policy. So Nixon had a class and cultural-based realignment, and he peeled off parts of the old New Deal Democratic base rather than just maximizing the existing Republican vote. Now, Reagan also won a historic landslide, and everybody knows this, 49 states, 59% of the popular vote, and he won on Morning in America, optimism, tax cuts, strong anti-communism, and traditional conservative values. But Reagan's margins were driven disproportionately by white voters, especially suburban and middle upper class whites. So in an electorate at the time that was still overwhelmingly white. So in the early to mid 1980s, non-Hispanic whites made up roughly 75 to 80% of the population and an even higher share of voters. So sweeping that group produced enormous landslides. But we have had a demographic shift in this country. Non-Hispanic whites have gone from 80% of the U.S. population in 1980 to roughly 57 to 58% today. So this change accelerated through immigration and the differential birth rates after the 1960s to 1980s. So JD Vance's core claim is that a strategy that wins primarily by huge margin among white voters, which was Reagan's model, is no longer sufficient for the same kind of dominance because whites are now a smaller share of the electorate. Even very strong performance against among whites would not produce the same results that it did in 1984. So Nixon's coalition, by contrast to Reagan, was more resilient to this change because it was built on issues like economic security for working people, cultural concerns, and skepticism of the elite and institutions, as well as law and order, of course. So Nixon's coalition, more resilient than Reagan's. So Vance argues that Trump's 2024 coalition was more like Nixon's than Reagan's. Trump improved significantly with Hispanic voters. He made gains with black voters. And Trump also consolidated non-college educated working class voters across groups. So the emphasis on borders and immigration, trade and economy, anti-woke cultural issues, and America First foreign policy, that functions as a version of Nixon's appeal to the forgotten American. So in short, Vance is saying that Reagan's coalition was optimized for a whiter America, and it relied on broad white voter dominance, while Nixon's coalition, and by extension the Trump-aligned one, was more durable because it was a populist, working class-oriented realignment that could adapt to demographic change. So this is a pretty common argument in post-2016 Republican circles, that the path to a sustained majority lies in building a multiracial, middle-class coalition around shared economic and cultural concerns, rather than depending primarily on maximizing the shrinking white vote with a traditional suburban conservatism. I sat down with a fellow Jeffersonian by the name of Ray Bozarth after the 2018 Republican primary when I had first moved here to Jefferson City, and he basically said that at the time. I think I had a hard time accepting it then, but I think I see the wisdom in it much more so. Ray, if you're listening, shout out. So Vance presents this as a lesson in political realism and then praises Nixon as a political genius for assembling a coalition that's proved more adaptable over time. Now, many of you are probably wondering, where does Richard Nixon fall on the liberty scale? Austin, you're a liberty guy. Where does Richard Nixon fall on the liberty scale? Well, it's a mixed record. And depending on how you feel about certain issues, or maybe how you feel about libertarians, you might fall on a different side of things when it comes to Richard Nixon. So from a perspective of liberty, there are things about him that modern liberty-minded people can respect, but there are also things that should have set off an alarm bell that we have about state power. But let's start with the good. Number one, Nixon understood the communist threat. He didn't treat communism like it was just another political opinion. He understood it as a totalitarian ideology. He understood that communists wanted power, and he understood that America had real enemies in the world, and some of them were living here. In an age when a lot of elites were making excuses for communist regimes, Nixon did not fall for that. Number two, Nixon pursued détente. Now, Nixon's foreign policy was not libertarian across the board. It wasn't. But he did understand that nuclear war with the Soviet Union would be a catastrophe, but he wanted to negotiate from strength. He wanted to reduce the risk of great power war. He understood that the world is dangerous, that America has limits, and that peace sometimes requires hard-nosed negotiation. Number 3, Nixon exposed the myth of neutral institutions. The press was not neutral. The bureaucracy was not neutral. The universities were not neutral. The intelligence agencies were not neutral. Nixon saw that, and a lot of younger people on the right are realizing that he was right about that. Nixon was right about the deep state. The people who claim to be above politics, or the ones who claim to be neutral, they're often the most political people in the room. Number 4, Nixon ended the draft. This is probably his clearest liberty achievement, other than ending the war in Vietnam. But conscription, of course, is forced labor for the state, slavery. The government taking young men and forcing them into wars is one of the greatest violations of individual liberty imaginable. Ending the draft was a major win for freedom, and Nixon deserves credit for that. Number 5, Nixon understood power. He understood that politics is not a seminar. It's not a faculty lounge. It's not speeches about norms and democracies. Politics is conflict. Politics is leverage. Politics is about institutions. Politics is power, whether you like it or not. And that realism is very useful. But in my mind, it's useful if it leads you to distrust concentrated power, not necessarily worship the man who grabs it. Now the bad, because from a liberty perspective, Nixon's record is loaded with problems. Watergate was real, the break-in was real, the dirty tricks were real, the cover-up was real, abuse of power was real. You cannot be for limited government and excuse the president using political espionage and obstruction to protect himself. Nixon used the government against his enemies. The enemies lists were real, surveillance mentality, the instinct to weaponize federal power, and the kind of executive abuse that liberty-minded people oppose. So it is one thing to know that your enemies exist. It's another thing to use the state as your personal weapon against them. We can debate that. This is really where, though, I think that we could be the most fish-eyed on this one. Nixon grew the federal bureaucracy. The EPA was created under Nixon. The regulatory state expanded under Nixon. The administrative state gained more power under Nixon. So that means more centralized control from Washington, more agencies, more rules, more bureaucrats, less liberty. We're still fighting the EPA today. Whatever good intentions people claim, the result was more power in the hands of unelected officials. The FDA are the people who want to turn us into France and take away our air conditioning, the thing that makes America great. Nixon, of course, imposed wage and price controls, which was a direct attack on the free market. The government tried to override prices. It tried to control wages. It tried to manage the economy from the top down. That's not libertarianism. It's not even conservatism. That's central planning, and it's one of the clearest examples of Republican statism in modern American history. Number 5, before you roll your eyes, Nixon escalated the war on drugs, which is probably one of the most damaging parts of his legacy. The war on drugs has created civil asset forfeiture, federal intrusion into private life, and generations of Americans punished by the state for nonviolent conduct. From a liberty perspective, that is indefensible. So here's the verdict. Nixon is useful as a symbol. He reminds people not to trust the media, not to trust the bureaucracy, not to trust the intelligence agencies, and not to trust the official boomer morality play that we were all handed after Watergate. But Nixon is dangerous as a model because Nixon saw the machine clearly, but too often his answer was not to dismantle it. His answer was to control it. And that's the great lesson of Richard Nixon. He wasn't wrong that he had enemies. He was wrong to think that any one man could safely wield that much power. Thank you so much for tuning in to the Wake Up America show. I am Austin Peterson, and I'm glad and thankful to have you here. If you like this content, if you know for a fact that the segment that you just heard you would not hear on any other show, then drop a Rumble rant, give us a like, or gift a sub. The more financial contributions that you make, the better, of course. Can you bless me with something?
Can you bless me with something?
Oh, gosh.
Oh, gosh.
Money wars.
If you know that you couldn't hear that kind of a segment on any other show, then you need to drop a Rumble rant or gift a sub, or head over to forlibertyshop.com and support the Wake Up America show. Or what I would ask for you to do, and it's totally free to do so, is that you head over and sign the petition. It's time to enforce the Communist Control Act of 1954. The For Liberty Network launched a website on Friday, which is a citizen's declaration to enforce the Communist Control Act of 1954. I want to know why I don't see some of your names on that list. You can sign privately, But head over to communistcontrolact.com and sign here. You can list if you want to show your name publicly or sign privately. We are really thankful to everybody who has signed so far. We've got a list of public signers here. Some of your names might already be on that list. But if you go to our website, communistcontrolact.com, I'd love to have everybody, at least one person in all 50 states. So head on over to communistcontrolact.com, sign the petition, add your name to the list, read the information that we have here about a law. I have all of the details about the Communist Control Act of 1954. Go to communistcontrolact.com, sign the For Liberty Network's petition while you're there. You can also drop a donation on that site. Sound good? Thank you, St. Selma. You're not going to get this content anywhere else, and you're certainly not going to get interviews like the one you're about to hear. When we come back, Walter Block was ejected from the Mises Institute for supporting Israel after October 7th. It's going to be one of the best interviews I think I've ever done, and it's only right here on the Wake Up America show and the For Liberty Network. Don't go away. "'Tis the year of our Lord, 1801. President Trump Jefferson casts his gaze o'er the sovereign Potomac and beholds a most wretched spectacle upon the waters. From the cursed shores of Tripoli and the welfare coffers of distant Minnesota comes the brazen Captain Ilhan Omar, commanding her fleet of Barbary pirates. She demands her ransom, billions in reparations. Yet one instrument of fortitude suffices, a steaming chalice of Jeffersonian Java, bold and unapologetic from For Liberty shop. No more tribute to rogues, he thunders, and dispatches the Navy and Marines to smash Omar's fleet asunder. Trump Jefferson stands triumphant as Omar's plunder meets the end it deserved back in Minnesota. Jeffersonian Java, the coffee that gives true Americans the courage to refuse tribute and rebuke fraud. Procure yours at forlibertyshop.com and make America caffeinated again. Welcome back. In May of 2024, the Mises Institute stripped my next guest of the senior fellowship that he had held for decades, and his crime, supporting Israel after October 7th. The Ron Paul Institute, the Libertarian Institute, antiwar.com all followed, showing him the door. This is a man who worked alongside Murray Rothbard. He wrote the book, Defending the Undefendable. He holds the Harold Wirth Endowed Chair in Economics at Loyola University in New Orleans. They tried to erase him. Today, he writes more than ever. Professor Walter Block, welcome to the Wake Up America show. Good to see you, sir.
Recording in progress.
Thanks for having me. A delight to be with you.
Professor, you've spent decades building the intellectual backbone of this movement. I've been active in this movement for around 20 years now, ever since the Ron Paul campaign of 2008. But now, in May of 2024, you receive an email. It strips you of your senior fellowship you had held at the Mises Institute. So take me into that moment. When you read it, were you angry, or had you kind of already made peace with where all of this was headed?
I was more sad than angry because the way I see the libertarian movement, it's not only a philosophical, political movement, it's also an intellectual movement. And a think tank like the Mises Institute is not only supposed to promote liberty and promote good Austrian economics, but it's supposed to be an intellectual endeavor. And an intellectual endeavor engages in dialogue and debate. They don't say, well, you said X and therefore I'll never speak to you again. That's not the way to get to the truth. And presumably, we want to get to the truth, whether it's in a political or philosophical or economic arena. And the way to get to the truth is to debate, to discuss, to engage in a dialogue. We learn from each other. Whereas if I say, well, Austin, you disagree with me, I'll never speak to you again. Well, how can we learn? How can we progress? So I was more sad than anything.
Okay, Professor. So walk me through the reasoning for this, the reasoning that the Mises Institute gave, and then the reasoning that you believe. If you believe that the reasoning they gave is the actual reason, you can say that, but I'd be curious if you think that there were ulterior motives.
Well, the incident that started it was Hans Hoppe. Hans was also a senior fellow at the Mises Institute, and he wrote a blistering attack on me and my co-author because we had an article in the Wall Street Journal saying something to the effect that Israel has a right to defend itself. This was after October 7, 2023. And he has a way with a word. What he called me was an unhinged, bloodthirsty monster. It's got a certain ring to it, doesn't it? And what he said was that, I'm just out of it, and I'm a disgrace to libertarianism, and I ought to be kicked out of the Mises Institute. By the way, he was later kicked out of the Mises Institute also. But that's
we'll get to that in just a minute. But
okay.
you wrote a piece, The Classical Liberal Case for Israel.
Yeah.
And I'm curious, Professor, if you think that had something to do with it.
Well, this is the book that I wrote with my colleague, Alan Fuderman. And I'm sure that had something to do with it, but the specific thing was an article in the Wall Street Journal. Namely, I don't think Hans read the whole book, but he certainly read the article in the Wall Street Journal, which is a lot easier to read one article than an entire book. And on the basis of that, he said that he must break with me and have nothing to do with me. And that was the ostensible reason.
Professor, there seems to be this bizarre obsession with Israel that the movement, the libertarian movement in the United States, has taken up upon itself. And I wonder, do you agree that there is an outsized interest in the affairs of that government? And do you think that there's, maybe legitimate criticisms that people have in the libertarian movement of Israel and their influence in American politics? Because this has come to the forefront of the discussion with the defenestration of Thomas Massie from Congress, who is now sort of, taken up the cudgel against AIPAC and against Israel, who he blames for his loss, even more so than Donald Trump. So do you think that the libertarian movement in the United States is, for lack of a better word, obsessed?
I think that's a good word. Obsessed with Israel is a very good word. And it's strange because, we libertarians disagree on a lot of things. For example, abortion. Ron Paul is pro-life. Murray Rothbard is pro-choice. You can't get two better leaders of the libertarian movement than Ron Paul and Murray Rothbard, and yet they're exact opposite on abortion. Abortion is an important issue. There are probably more human beings who die because of abortion than in the Middle East. I'm not sure of that, but it's certainly an important issue. And yet nobody cancels anybody. Murray and Ron were friends until Murray passed away, and nobody kicked anybody out of anything. And yet it's a very important issue. And we disagree on 4 or 5 other things. I don't know, voluntary slavery, immigration. There are other issues where we disagree, and everybody is civil. On Israel, all of a sudden, we go apoplectic. Why is this? Well, there are various hypotheses. You were asking, is what Hans Hoppe said was the ostensible reason, or was there a deeper reason? Well, the obvious superficial reason is Israel. But there are other possibilities. One of them is anti-Semitism. I'm not sure about this because I'm Jewish, and yet I've been with these groups for 40, 50 years, and there's never been any question of, kicking me out for being a Jew. And I mean, Murray Rothbard was Jewish, Mises was Jewish, so I reject that.
No, Rothbard was Jewish, but he was an atheist Jew, and he was a fierce critic of Israel, Professor, and you know that. He believed, of course, all states are illegitimate. He was fiercely opposed to U.S. foreign aid. He was also fiercely critical of Zionist revisionism because he thought it was fanatical and militaristic. And when it came down to the question of sitting on the fence between Israel and its enemies, Rothbard wrote a famous essay where he said that, yeah, you should pick a side. A lot of libertarians say they want to say neutral in foreign affairs. And Professor, they said, Rothbard said, well, no, I think there is a time when you need to choose sides. And Rothbard chose the side against Israel, Professor. So isn't a lot of the modern libertarian movement just in essence following in Rothbard's footsteps in that way, that modern American libertarians side against Israel because they want to be on Rothbard's side?
Yes, that's absolutely true. He wrote that. I forget the exact title of that essay, something about the war in the Middle East, something like that. And what you say is exactly correct. He said that Israel was in the wrong. And a lot of libertarians follow Murray Rothbard. But again, Murray Rothbard was pro-choice and Ron Paul was pro-life. So why don't we kick Ron Paul out of the movement? Which is sort of a contradiction. I mean, he is sort of the movement in many ways. So there's this anomaly between abortion and Israel. Both are important issues, and yet on one, there's serenity, there's peace, there's disagreement, but there's no cancellation. You know, we libertarians make fun of the left for cancellation. You use the wrong pronoun, you get canceled. But we've got cancellation in the libertarian movement, which is, obscene, disgusting, despicable. We're supposed to be intellectuals who try to argue and discuss. We're not supposed to be canceling, and yet we cancel.
Now, Professor, after the Mises Institute threw you out, you wrote a piece titled that you continue to support the Mises Institute at 99%, and in it, you defend their right to do what they've done to you. So, Professor, explain to me, how does a man get to 99% after a knife in the back like that?
Well, I still regard the Mises Institute as one of the best, if not the head and shoulders over any other group in terms of Austrian economics and libertarian theory, apart from Israel. I think they're superlative. I wouldn't have been associated with them for 50 years if I didn't think that. So, I'm trying to, I guess, be more sad than angry at them. Just because they made a mistake here doesn't mean that they don't do anything good. They do a lot of things not good, but excellent. So, I don't know why I picked 99%. I could have picked 98%, but, they should be punished a little bit because they went off the rails on this issue. But I'm still a supporter, and I'm still a supporter of the Ron Paul Institute and the Future of Freedom Foundation and the Libertarian Institute and antiwar.com, all of which have also canceled me. I think they all do very, very good work. This is the libertarian movement. Okay, so they have a little Achilles heel. Well, okay, a big Achilles heel.
Big Achilles. Professor, I think you're far too kind to people who are letting their prejudices interfere with their capability to engage in moral reasoning. And I think the institutions that you have listed off there are morally bankrupt, Professor. I think they don't do good work anymore. If they did do good work, it was quite some time ago. The person who is essentially who's feeding off of the malingering presence of Ron Paul online, Daniel McAdams, who runs Ron Paul's Institute, openly praises communist regimes. I mean, you want to talk, you're canceled because you make a classical liberal case for Israel, Professor, and yet the person who runs Ron Paul's channels and his foreign policy think tank takes pictures of himself with communist Cubans and openly praises the militarist invasion of Vladimir Putin in Ukraine. So, Professor, small Achilles heel, big Achilles heel. Like, how are we not sort of like turning this around? I mean, in some ways, they deserve to be canceled by any libertarian measure, Professor.
Well, I didn't know this about Daniel McAdams, that he praises commies. I mean, that's that's a little off the rails. I just didn't know that. I can't imagine that Ron Paul would support that. Although, Ron Paul is what now, 92, 93. I'm not sure how old he is. I don't look. I'm 84. But, I'm almost 85. I shouldn't be casting aspersions on people for being old, but. I didn't know that about him, although I did run into him in a seminar. And these people are anti-war, like antiwar.com. Libertarians are not anti-war. Libertarians are anti-offensive war, but we favor defensive war. Look, if the U.S. invaded Canada, Canada should fight back. If Canada invaded the U.S., obviously neither of these is reasonable, but then the U.S. should fight back. So we're not pacifists. We believe in defensive war, so you can't be anti-war. And yet,
Professor, you once sort of, at least in my world, I say famous, but like you once famously endorsed me for president of the United States in 2016 before you famously unendorsed me because of my position on the non-aggression principle. And my argument at the time is one that I still hold to today, which was the question of how the non-aggression principle, it makes a de facto pacifist argument because of the modern realities of warfare. And Israel is faced with this question at all. They're not allowed to defend themselves on the world stage, right? There's this, what I appear, and I don't necessarily want to get into too deep of a philosophical debate here about this, but essentially, what has happened is that the non-aggression principle is turned against the people who advocate for it, that the people who want to destroy Israel would demand freedom and rights and liberty and liberalism. But as soon as these Palestinian Muslims took control, they would instantly destroy the liberties that we advocated for, which is why, I agree with Hans Hermann Hoppe and his view of closed borders libertarianism. And I've become, far less attuned to what the Cato Institute is pushing with the open borders crowd, because I do think culture matters. And I think Javier Milei, and this is the pivot that I want to make, I think Javier Milei probably has the clearest moral view of this when it comes to the question of civilization. Libertarians have been so focused on the question of the rights of individuals, Walter, that we have forgotten the question of what it is that builds civilization. And civilization is not an individualist pursuit. It's a team sport. And Javier Milei seems to recognize this, which is why he makes open defenses of the United States and Israel. And Walter, his open defenses of the United States of Israel is why Hans Hermann Hoppe calls him not a real libertarian, and why American libertarians, who at first were excited by Javier Milei's victory in Argentina, have now turned their back on him because he's a Zionist, Professor. How do you respond to all this?
I think you're absolutely right. And, I'm sorry, I forgot about 2016 supporting you with the nuts.
It's okay. I remember that. I've gotten over it, but it's an important factoid in this, but go ahead.
I'm delighted with Javier Milei. He personally regards me as one of his mentors, as he did Hans Hoppe and Murray Rothbard. I think he named one of his dogs after Murray. And I'm delighted that he distributed one of my books, Defending the Undefendable, to his entire cabinet. And I agree with you entirely that the reason that a lot of libertarians are against him is not because of his economics. I mean, he's magnificent. It's because he supports Israel. So Israel is sort of like a virus among the libertarian movement. It's weird. It's very strange because, what is he doing? He's getting rid of rent control. He's lowering inflation, and he's having free trade, and he's firing bureaucrats, and he's doing everything he can. Yes, he didn't get rid of the central bank in the first second. People don't realize that not everybody in his own party agrees with him. And certainly there are other people in other parties that disagree. So he's doing the best he can. The idea that an anarcho-capitalist is the president of a major country is almost, unbelievable. So we ought to be, putting him on our shoulders and having a ticker tape parade for him. And instead they're whining that, well, he didn't do this perfectly and he didn't do this quickly enough. This is Israel is a virus for the libertarian movement because this man is a hero, and Hans Hoppe is rejecting him, and many other people in the Mises in the libertarian movement are rejecting him. It's just preposterous.
Well, Professor, one, he embarrasses us all because of his success, and many of us who, you know, having worked on these projects for, you know, I've worked 20 years. You've worked far longer. Ron Paul worked far longer. And Javier Milei has achieved incredible success, unlike anything that we have achieved here in the United States. So he embarrasses us by comparison. And then on a secondary factor, the sort of niggling doubts that people have about him, I don't trust that the reasons why they are attacking him are because of the central bank, because it almost always comes couched in criticism of his views of the state of Israel, which has become, Walter, it's become this sort of heliocentric view where Israel exists at the center of the American libertarian project and becomes a litmus test for what is a true libertarian and what is not a true libertarian. And so then we have Javier Milei, who seems to look at things more from, I guess, maybe you might even say an Ayn Randian perspective. And Ayn Rand was no big fan of American libertarians. She saw us as hippies who attached on to her philosophy and ideology. And Professor, I have to say that after 20 years in this movement, that I think I somewhat agree with Ayn Rand's criticisms of American libertarian movement, because culturally it is more obsessed with leftist libertine views of society. Culturally it identifies with the left. And it abdicates its economic prerogatives in favor of an attack on Israel, which comes along with it the baggage of what I consider to be a view, I call this third worldism, Professor. In other words, it's like you can look at someone individually and say, okay, well, they hold those beliefs and I can agree with this or I can agree with that. But political movements, the way that they work is that when you're voting for a Democrat, you're voting for the entire grab bag that comes along with it, Professor. In essence, you're getting open borders and you're getting abolish ICE, abolish the police, et cetera, et cetera. And you can't separate those things from it. When you look at, so the problem with the whole anti-Israel movement is that the American libertarians are much more comfortable siding with open communists. This is why you see, I think Tucker Carlson is sort of like his own thing. But this is why you'll see many American libertarians frequently appearing on leftist podcasts, frequently making common cause with leftists like Anna Kasparian and the Young Turks, people who not only call for death to Israel, but they call for death to Jews specifically, Professor. Right. And so we've abandoned the libertarian project, the economics of Mises and the revelations of Friedrich Hayek, of Bombewerk, of Schumpeter, of yourself, Professor, in order to adhere to a heliocentric view that I think I trace this line all the way back to Murray Rothbard and his views of Israel, Professor. So one, how do we untangle this Gordian knot? Do we do it like Alexander the Great? Do we come in with our sword and just slice it in half? Or do we try and pick it apart with white papers over the years, Professor? Because I'm not sure I or any of the others who are feeling like it's time to remove ourselves from this movement have the patience for that.
Well, I think we have to be careful when we say the libertarian movement. We've mentioned 4 or 5 institutions of the libertarian movement, but as far as I know, there's been no survey of all people who consider themselves libertarians. What's your view on Israel? Now, my back of the envelope estimate is that 2/3 of libertarians would be against Israel and 1/3 would be in favor. So it's unfair to blame the whole libertarian movement. And as for leftism, I mean, if a man offers a woman money to go to bed with him, the right wing would put them both in jail. And that's not libertarian. And also the left is better on drug legalization. I mean, the only state that ever legalized cocaine was Oregon. And Oregon is, a blue state. So I think that the libertarian movement apart from Israel is okay. They have a virus on Israel, but I don't want to reject the libertarian movement because they agree with certain things on the left, like prostitution should be legal, pornography should be between consenting adults, drugs should be legal, whereas the conservatives are very bad on those issues.
They are, but Professor, it's I completely reject the kind of framing that there's like that they're equally bad. They're definitely not equally bad. The question to me here is one of scale, because I might have gone along with that argument when it, before COVID-19 and the absolute tyranny of the left in the many states and in the counties across this country. I don't believe that the Republicans are equally as bad as Democrats. And I think that Republicans uniquely, and this is where American libertarians, I think, are many of them going wrong, not yourself particularly, but that they don't understand that they make moral equivocations between the United States and Israel and its enemies. In other words, you'll frequently hear American libertarians say that the United States is the greatest terrorist nation amongst all of the nations because of the interventionist foreign policy of the neocons, because of America's history of militarism. And yet, Professor, when I see that as morally bankrupt, because despite the flaws of the United States, despite the flaws of Israel, and there are many, if you were to ask any libertarian or any Democrat that lives here in the United States, any like average college leftist, which nation they would be able to wear their short skirt on to go around on a college campus, they would all equivocally say Israel. None of them would survive. They would be murdered. And Ayn Rand, I think, probably said it best. When you see a war between civilization and barbarians, you support the civilized man. And I think that encapsulates everything. So if the Republicans want to put somebody in jail for having sex with a prostitute, I might not agree with that, Professor, but the Republicans support civilization. The Republicans are the civilized man. The Democrats are the barbarians. And American libertarians, the 2/3 of them, Professor, that on the back of the envelope math, 2/3, they side with the barbarians. Where am I wrong? Where are the flaws in my logic, Professor?
Well, I never said we're equidistant. Look, I'm a big supporter of Donald Trump. He pardoned, what's his name, the guy who did that drug thing?
Ross Ulbricht.
That's it. He pardoned Ross Ulbricht. If he never did anything else, you have to take your hat off to him. Kamala Harris would never have pardoned Ross Ulbricht. My message to libertarians, and I've written about this somewhere, was, look, if you're in a blue state, don't vote for Donald, vote for the libertarian. Because Donald doesn't need your vote. He's going to lose in the blue states. If you're in a red state, also vote for the libertarian, not the Republican, because Donald is going to win big in the red states. However, if you're in a purple state where Donald needs your vote, then vote for Donald. So I'm trying to, and I don't
trying
think
to split the baby, Professor, but you need to take advice from Murray Rothbard, who said that you should not ride the fence and that you should just pick a side. Now, Hans Hermann Hoppe wrote an open letter. He publicly vilified you over Israel, but then the German Mises Institute gives Javier Milei its Ludwig von Mises Award. Hoppe resigns from the board in protest. Milei holds the same pro-Israel position. So when Hoppe looks at you and he looks at Milei, what is the difference? What is he punishing?
Well, there's another hypothesis beside this anti-Semitism. Mises had two, Bomba Verk had two followers, Mises and Hayek. Mises had two followers, Rothbard and Israel Kirzner. A lot of people say that Rothbard had two followers, two lieutenants, two main followers, me and Hans. One hypothesis, Hans didn't want to share this honor with me. So that's why he viciously attacked me. That's a possibility, but I'm not sure that that's correct, because we've been the two lieutenants that have been associated as Murray's main followers for many years. So why all of a sudden? So I have to reject that hypothesis. Look, this thing about the German Mises Institute or the German Menk, I forget which group there was that gave Milei an award, and then Hans Hoppe left in a huff. This is despicable. I mean, this German group was absolutely correct in giving Milei an award, because Milei is our hero. And to protest an award from Milei because Milei supports Israel is, again, a virus of part of the libertarian movement. Now, I'm not sure it's 2/3, 1/3. There's been no survey. I'd be very curious if some legitimate survey group took a survey of the libertarians and saw what it was. It might not be 2/3, 1/3. It might be halfy. I'm not sure about that. There are too many libertarians who are anti-Israel, however you put it.
Professor David Gordon ran a piece on Mises.org called Orwellian Libertarianism, the Topsy-Turvy World of Walter Block. And he went after your argument on human shields. So when an aggressor deliberately hides behind civilians and those civilians die, who does libertarian theory actually hold responsible? The man pulling the trigger, or the man who put the baby in front of him and used the baby as a human shield? How would you answer that difficult question, Professor?
I agree with you entirely on this. Look, here I have my two children. These are cough drops, but they're my two children, and I put them over here. And I now have a knife. It's a pen, so don't worry about it. And I'm going to attack you. I'm going to kill you. And I have my two children strapped onto me. And by the way, you've got your wife and kids behind you, and I'm going to kill you all. Should you let me do this? Because if you shoot me, my kids die? Of course not. And now let's say I'm coming at you with my knife here. It's just a pen, don't worry. And you shoot me, and my kids die. And I die. Who is responsible for the death of my two children? Me, for goodness sakes. And I'm Hamas. Hamas puts its military hardware in a hospital, and then Israel sends out a leaflet saying we're going to bomb this hospital because the rockets and the drones are coming from this hospital. Go away. And then Hamas won't allow the people to leave. And then Israel bombs the hospital, and civilians die, and all of a sudden everyone says, well, it's Israel's fault. Even the Nazis didn't do that. The Nazis are bad guys, right? They never did that. And Hamas is doing that. And on October 7th, 9th, at Harvard and Princeton and Columbia and all these other schools, they're saying that Israel is in the wrong. This is before Israel did anything. This is October 8th. Not only the libertarian movement, part of the libertarian movement crazy, but part of the Harvard University students, Columbia, my old alma mater, Columbia, they're having all sorts of tent cities to support Hamas, what they did on October 7th, 2023. The world is crazy, and not just some libertarians, but people on the left. You were saying we're not really equidistant. The Republicans are better than the Democrats from a libertarian point of view. I couldn't agree with you more. Yes, we have to legalize pornography and prostitution and drugs, and that's about all that the left is good on, where the right is bad on. But on everything else, the left is totally crazy.
Professor, in some ways, this question of self-defense and the non-aggression principle and who is the aggressor in this one, some of this comes down to the question of consequentialism versus deontology. And it leads me to wonder, at what point is an individual does an individual have to stop trying to defend himself if the civilian death count gets itself up to a high enough level? So, for example, the dropping of the bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, right? In a perfect world, we get to look back on and make a moral judgment on Harry Truman. And I would say probably a great majority of libertarians judge Harry Truman to be a war criminal. He was a baby killer and a murderer. But at what point knowing that the fog of war existed at the time, and that they had no idea if Japan would surrender, how many civilians are you allowed to kill, Professor, if, compare it to the Israel situation today? I mean, if Palestinians continue their terrorist attacks, if they continue to hide behind women and children, can Israel go up and to the point of completely eradicating the Palestinian civilization from the face of this earth if they continue to launch aggressive offensive attacks, Walter? In other words, what people on the left and what libertarians repeatedly use the word genocide, Walter. How far can the individual go to defend his own life against aggressors if defending his own life would take the lives of civilians up to and including the eradication of the entire civilian population, Professor?
Okay, well, look, instead of 2 children, I'm going to have a lot of children. I would say all the way. Look, I think all the way. I think that the Hiroshima and Nagasaki is wrong, the analogy, because the big deal was unconditional surrender or just surrender. My understanding of history is they were willing to surrender, but they wanted the chief guy to, I don't know, not to be killed.
Yeah.
The emperor.
Let's not debate Hiroshima and Nagasaki, but let's keep it on Israel and Palestine, because if the Palestinians continue their terror attacks, and if they do not stop and they continue to place themselves in civilian districts, should Israel continue to defend themselves again with defensive force up to and including the complete and total eradication of the Palestinian population, Professor?
Absolutely. And who would be responsible for that? Hamas, Hezbollah, Iran. They're the ones that are committing mass suicide. Israel has a right to defend itself. There's a wonderful quote from Netanyahu. He said, if the Hamas would put down its weapons, there'd be peace. If we put down our weapons, there'd be no Israel and no Jews around here. Look, these, I only had 2 children before, and now I have 1 million children. It's the same thing. The numbers don't count. I'm attacking you. Where's my knife? Here's my knife. It's just a pen, and now I've got 1 million children, or 2 million. I think there are 2 million Gazans. Every last one of them is Hamas's fault.
Agreed.
Israel has a right to defend itself.
Yeah, this won't win us. This won't win us any accolades online, but it's true. Now, Professor, the Libertarian Party in the United States is collapsing. It's gotten its lowest vote totals since the 1970s. The anti-war wing of the Libertarian movement is busy purging its own founders, and meanwhile, Javier Milei is out there having poverty in a real country. So if a young person came to you today, Professor, and asked you where the liberty movement actually lives now, where would you send them?
You're a nasty man. I'm kidding. That's a rough question.
Yes, it is. But I want to know, because I need to know, Professor, because quite frankly, you're one of the few people that I can still look to for some sanity in this world, Professor. So if I ask you these difficult questions, it's because I'm having this war in my own mind.
No. I appreciate that. And, when I said you're a nasty man, I did exactly the way I meant it. I think a survey should be made of the libertarian movement and see just who's who. And it's possible that half of the libertarian movement is okay. I don't know that it's 2/3 bad and 1/3 good. I'm not willing to give up on the Libertarian Party. The name Libertarian, we got to protect it. We got to fight for it. We can't give it up to these anti-Semites, these anti-Israel people. I think we have to fight for the libertarian movement. So if a young person came to me and said, well, how can I make the world a little bit better? I would say join the Libertarian Party, join, what is that, the Free State Project in New Hampshire, join Seasteading, join Cato, join whatever, join the Mises Institute and try to change that from within. I think we should fight for this and not sort of give up. And what should we then start? The Schlibertarian movement? So my answer to your very tough question is we should fight for our institutions. And we should realize that Murray Rothbard is wrong. I mean, he and John Locke and also Hans Hoppe have done more than anyone else on homesteading. The first people that were there are the rightful owners. Well, look, the Al-Aqsa Mosque is here. The second temple is here. The first temple is here. Well, who was there first? Obviously, the Jews were there first. So if you believe in homesteading, the Jews are the rightful owners of all these contested lands, and not in the West Bank, but rather in Judea and Samaria, and in Gaza, and in Golan Heights, and I think the new area of northern Israel should be the Litani River south, namely the southern Lebanon should be part of Israel. These people should learn that when they attack Israel, not only do they get killed, but they lose territory. They don't like losing territory. Maybe that'll stop them. So I think Israel would be justified right now in not leaving Lebanon, that part of Lebanon that they now control, the south of the Litani River, the southern Lebanon should be northern Israel, because bombs keep coming from there, and Lebanon is incapable of stopping the Hezbollah. So I think that we should try to fight for our institutions and not give them up.
Professor Milei has been president in Argentina for over 2 years now. Inflation has been crushed. A budget surplus has been captured. Poverty has nearly been halved. But Argentina is not an anarcho-capitalist paradise. The state is still there. And, as the purist in the room, is Milei proof that libertarianism can actually govern, or is it proof that we will have to compromise once we touch real power?
Again, I have to accuse you of being a nasty man. That's another roughie.
Yeah.
Look, he's been in there 2 years, and the Weltanschauung of Argentina is Peronista. It's socialist, it's fascism. He's done great work. Anarcho-capitalism is a wonderful ideal, and I'm an anarcho-capitalist. I'm not a limited government libertarian or a minarchist, but I think that there's hope theoretically, but I'm into sociobiology. What's sociobiology? Sociobiology is a theory of why we are the way we are. And the theory is we are the way we are because of what it took to live when we were in the caves or in the trees or wherever we were. What we libertarians are fighting is biology. Let me give you an example of sociobiology. What they do sometimes is they'll take you to a room and they say, we're going to conduct an experiment on you, but just sit in this room for 10 minutes. We're not ready for you. And what they find with men, they ask men, well, how many objects do you remember in that room when you go to the test room? And they'll remember 3. They ask women, how many objects do you remember? They'll remember 50. Why is this? Because women were picking berries, and they're very meticulous, and they had to know which were the good berries and which were the bad berries. How about a sense of direction? Men have a much better sense of direction than women. Why? Because the men had to go 20 miles away to get an antelope or whatever it was, and if they couldn't get back, they didn't leave many children. So that's a sociobiological explanation of a sense of direction and meticulousness. When I'm trying to find something in my refrigerator, I can't find it. I ask my wife, and she knows exactly where it is. Go figure. What's this got to do with anarcho-capitalism? Well, in the days when you had people living in a group of 25, it paid to have a leader who was very strong. And that's our biology. So we're fighting biology, we libertarians. So yes, Milei hasn't conquered biology yet.
Professor,
give the man a break.
I have yes, I agree. I have another question that's going to make you upset with me. Rothbard named a rabbit, I think. Milei named a dog, both after each other's heroes in a way. And you knew Rothbard. You worked with him. Forget what the Institute, says today, but this question, I want you to answer with what you think is true, not what you wish were true, Professor. If Murray Rothbard were alive right now, is he cheering Javier Milei, or is he signing the letter that kicked you out?
I'm going to accuse you of being a vicious man again. I wrote an essay on this, and I said Murray would support Milei. Murray would put Milei up on his shoulders and march him around in a ticker tape parade. I have to believe that Murray would see Milei as magnificent and also disagree with him on Israel. Why can't he be schizophrenic like the rest of us? Why can't he? Why can't he say that Milei is a magnificent president and he's wrong on Israel? That would be my assessment of what Murray would say. And I think that's a reasonable assessment. Whereas to say that because he's bad on Israel, namely you disagree with him on Israel, therefore what he's doing domestically is inept and no good, that's just lunatic. And Murray was not a lunatic.
I wish I could agree with you, Professor. I really do. I really wish that what you say was true, but I think I'm beyond my starry-eyed Ron Paul 2008 years. I'm a man who has been through a lot and seen a lot, and I've read nowhere near as much Murray Rothbard as you have. But I do believe that because of what he wrote in his later years about Israel, that he probably would have been more aligned with the Hans Hermann Hoppe view. Now, Murray Rothbard had strange associations. He marched with Maoists. He built coalitions with bizarre groups of people until the very end, he actually advocated for a paleo-conservative alliance. And in some strange ways, Professor, the paleo-conservative alliance that Murray Rothbard advocated for in supporting some, Southern segregationists, Confederates at the time, David Duke, et cetera, it bore itself out with the rise of a nationalist movement that came to prominency here in the United States. And many of those people became supporters of Donald Trump. And now some of those people, they pushed themselves out. They became what they, was known as the alt-right. This is the crowd of people that chanted, "Jews shall not replace us." And many of those people then mixed with the Ron Paul movement, of which, sort of took in a lot of our libertarian people. So the libertarian movement in many ways split into, after the Ron Paul years, split into the leftist culture warrior people, where you have them, joining hands with the Marxists, not because of necessarily their views on social policy or drugs, although that might be part of it, but because of their views on Israel mainly, largely, and foreign policy. And so foreign policy became this massive major question in the libertarian movement, where it's like I said, a heliocentric view of Israel as at the center of the American libertarian project. But now we have to ask ourselves, Professor, what is really left here in the United States? So what is when you say, join the Libertarian Party, there aren't a lot of young people who are going to be inspired by that, Professor. There aren't a lot of institutions in the United States that here's the thing, that I think are advancing a version of libertarianism that is winning. Professor, you really want to hear for me to offend everybody. I think that the most effective and successful libertarian movement in the United States is MAGA. And MAGA has actually accomplished more libertarian wins than any libertarian alive sans Javier Milei. In the United States, the libertarian movement has failed as a project to advance our cause in everything other than perhaps marijuana legalization and maybe a few other things here and there. MAGA consistently has libertarian wins. Donald Trump consistently does libertarian things, but the libertarian movement despises him because they look at his bombing of Iran or some of the buying shares of Intel and American companies and things, and they overlook his naming of the Libertarian Supreme Court Justice Neil Gorsuch. Are we just chronically incapable of accepting incremental wins because of the necessary and inevitable losses? In other words, Professor Thomas Sowell famously put it this way, Walter, that there are no solutions, only trade-offs, meaning that if we want to advance libertarian goals, we must accept that there will be non-libertarian associated elements of this. And so my question, and this is what I'm fighting with, Professor, and maybe you can help me work this out, is that perhaps the libertarian ends justify the non-libertarian means. Would you agree with that, Professor? Because we focused on the Constitution, we focused on anarcho-capitalism, we focused on the NAP, we focused on Bomberwerk, we focused on on your writings and the Mises Institute and these institutions. Donald Trump brought a club. He is a warlord. We are a priestly class, Professor. You are a high priest of the priestly class of libertarians. Perhaps what libertarians need is a warlord. Am I insane for suggesting such a thing?
No. I think that Donald has done great work in many areas. He did the Abraham Accords. He moved the U.S. Embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem. He supported Israel. He bombed Iran. He did wonderful things. He did some bad things. He said tariffs were the best word in the English language. On the other hand, I support tariffs, Donald Trump's tariffs, in the following, not from an economic point of view. I mean, they'll kick me out. They'll take my PhD away if I say tariffs are good economically. But politically, look, suppose China is doing something bad with the Uyghurs. And now we don't like that. And we've got two ways. Donald has got two ways of stopping it. One, he can bomb China. The other is he can raise the tariffs in China. Well, much better to do that than to
engage in an active war.
So I think from a political point of view, tariffs are justified as one more weapon in the armament. From an economic point of view, it's just silly. But then again, the tariffs against Israel and the tariffs against Argentina are not high. They're not punitive. And look, Donald wants Europe to defend itself a little bit. What is he going to do with France and Italy and bomb them? No, but he can raise their tariffs, which tariffs against them, which I think is a much better way of doing it. So I'm more moderate on tariffs. From an economic point of view, they're crazy, but from a political view, he's wielding them in a warlord-like way. So Donald, he not only Gorsuch, but he's appointed 3 Supreme Court judges who are sensible. So remember, I said in the purple states, libertarians should vote for Donald. I'm a Donald person, and he gave that pardon to I forget the guy's name again.
Ross Ulbricht. Yeah.
Ross Ulbricht. That is wonderful. So I'm not equidistant between the Democratic Party and the Republican Party. I insist we should legalize drugs and prostitution and stuff. But other than that, the left is just crazy. On the other hand, I believe in affirmative action. What kind of affirmative action? The universities are a cesspool. The Sodom and Gomorrah test, God was going to smite Sodom and Gomorrah, and the angel said, if I can find 10 righteous people, you'll save them, and he couldn't. Can you find 10 libertarians or conservatives at Harvard? Of the professoriate, and there are 2,000 professors? No, this is a cesspool. The universities are a cesspool. So what we need is affirmative action for conservative and libertarian professors. Okay. And Donald's trying to do that.
Professor, one last question for you, and this is going to be another mad at me question here, but is it better to be a true, pure libertarian who never does libertarian things, or a non-libertarian who sometimes does libertarian things?
Why can't I have my cake and eat it? Why can't I say that both are good, that we have specialization and division of labor in every area, including politics?
Because, Professor, I think that it's the overemphasis on the priestly class of the libertarian movement since its foundations has been to our detriment. I don't think, because I think we've tried the trying to have our cake and eat it too is endemic to the problem that we face right now. We've allowed, and you like biology, right? If you have a clone in a species, then it's a DNA copy. It makes it more. It's not resilient to disease, Professor, because the disease can attack the DNA easily. And so once the virus has been able to capture the clones, then it can destroy the entire population. We don't have resistance to this kind of a disease, Professor. We haven't built up an intellectual resistance because, as you can see by your treatment, by the way that Hans Hermann Hoppe has treated Javier Milei, we have not got the kinds of antibodies that are necessary to prepare us for the type of governance that Javier Milei is actually doing. He's out there actually creating a new form of libertarianism in a way. He doesn't adhere to the true anarcho-capitalist ways that have been laid out by the forebears. He's forging a new path. So in some ways, I think that he's the model. But Professor, I don't think we can have our cake and eat it too. And I wonder if you would agree with me that we do not have a resistance to the disease of this, what I call heliocentric version of Israel, with Israel at the center, but I just call it Israel derangement syndrome. We don't have an antibody to this, Professor.
Well, I want to mention a few other people and organizations. One is Milton Friedman, who is not a perfect libertarian, but has done great work in many ways and did really good stuff about airline deregulation and, specific things that you could chalk up to him. And also there are 50 state free enterprise institutions. Each state has one. In my state, New Orleans, there's the Pelican Institute. They're concerned with state issues, not with foreign policy. And they're libertarian oriented. They're very libertarian. And a young person who asked me, well, how can I help promote liberty? I would say we've got these free, not only the Free State Project in
New Hampshire.
New Hampshire, I'm losing my marbles here. New Hampshire, but also each state has one. I used to teach in Arkansas, I used to teach in Massachusetts. Each of them have a state group, and then they have a convention every year of all 50 states groups get together. And I've never heard any anti-Israel stuff from them because they're domestically oriented. Not only Milton Friedman, but Hayek, you mentioned Thomas Sowell. I have to tell you my Thomas Sowell story. I was an editor of a book on discrimination and affirmative action, the bad kind, and he was giving me, he was one of the contributors, and he said, if you change one word of what I give you, I'm pulling my article out of your compilation. And evidently he's had editors who change what he meant, and I would never do that even for a lefty, but certainly not for him. But I found 5 typos. So I said, hey, can I change these? He said, yes. So that's my Thomas Sowell story. But I'm a big fan of Thomas Sowell, who is not a perfect libertarian, but he's a theoretician. So I'm having my cake and eat it. I mean, if you want to get rid of theoreticians, get rid of Thomas Sowell? No. Thomas Sowell is magnificent. Gary Becker, my former dissertation advisor at Columbia, was just a theoretician. There's room for theoreticians also.
Well, room for theoreticians also. That's all there is, Professor. My argument is that we need warlords, that we need Donald Trumps. We need fighters. We need people who are going to get messy, going to be dirty, that are going to be impure, Professor, like Javier Milei. Stephen Kinsella said Ron Paul did more to spread Austrian ideas than Milei ever has, and said without the foreign policy baggage. Well, Donald Trump has done more libertarian shit than Ron Paul ever has. So is the real fight inside this movement, Professor, really about Israel at all? Or is it about whether libertarians are even allowed to win power in the real world instead of staying pure and irrelevant?
Both. We can support Donald Trump when he's good, and he's good on many areas. But why do we have to give up on libertarian theoreticians like Thomas Sowell, who never did anything? But he's magnificent. So I want to protect.
I'm not suggesting we give up on them, Professor, but I'm suggesting that the warriors who are in the arena, that the people like Javier Milei, that the people like Donald Trump, that the people who are out there getting messy, impure wins could still be considered a part of this project without having written a book about a theory of, of the non-aggression principle.
I agree with you entirely, but I think I'm changing your mind. You're now agreeing with me that we need both. We need a Thomas Sowell theoretician or a Hayek theoretician. Hayek never did anything. Mises never did anything. Bombervert, Menger never did anything. But they're part of our group, and also Donald Trump. Imperfect as he is, Milei, I don't think he's that imperfect. I think Milei is a lot more free enterprise than Donald. But Donald is very, very good on many, many issues, and we should support him, as I did with this purple state business where libertarians should not vote for the Libertarian Party, but should vote for Donald in the purple states. What more, how much closer can I get to your vision than that?
Professor, this has been a great interview and a great discussion. You give me a lot to think about. I want to give you an opportunity to share anything with the audience now that you think perhaps we missed in this discussion, or if you have like a new book or anything that you'd like to plug, this is your opportunity.
I have a commercial message. I'm a professor at New Orleans, the Loyola University, New Orleans. I'm always looking for students who want to be theoretically advanced in libertarian and Austrian economics. So if you are a high school student or you're a grandpa and you've got high school student grandchildren, think of Loyola University, New Orleans.
Okay, Professor. Thank you very much for your time, and thank you for your champion of individual liberty. I find myself strangely, siding with the state of Israel, even though I'm not Jewish, I have no special affinity towards them. But my argument is that this is a question of civilization versus barbarians. And I agree with Ayn Rand that you should support the civilized man. Professor, thank you very much for your time today. And I look forward to hopefully speaking to you again in the future. And thank you for being so generous with your time.
Thanks for having me.
Hope you enjoyed that interview. If you did, don't forget, you can only watch those kinds of interviews right here on the Wake Up America show. Best name ever, Arvolt24. Quest Fanning, you are Amalek. Say that 5 times fast. Amalek. Joni Rankin's here with us as well. Hope you guys enjoyed the show today. If you did, don't forget to click the like button. And if today's your first time watching the show, click the follow button as well. As you exit through the Grift Shop. Head on over to thegriftshop.com. Get yourself some America 250 gear if you still love freedom. Appreciate you guys. Hope you guys enjoyed it. Arvolt, Quest, Joni, have a great day. See you tomorrow. Tis the year of our Lord, 1801. President Trump Jefferson casts his gaze o'er the sovereign Potomac and beholds a most wretched spectacle upon the waters. From the cursed shores of Tripoli and the welfare coffers of distant Minnesota comes the brazen Captain Ilhan Omar, commanding her fleet of Barbary pirates. She demands her ransom, billions in reparations. Yet one instrument of fortitude suffices, a steaming chalice of Jeffersonian Java, bold and unapologetic from For Liberty shop. No more tribute to rogues, he thunders, and dispatches the Navy and Marines to smash Omar's fleet asunder. Trump Jefferson stands triumphant as Omar's plunder meets the end it deserved back in Minnesota. Jeffersonian Java, the coffee that gives true Americans the courage to refuse tribute and rebuke fraud. Procure yours at forlibertyshop.com and make America